Welcome to Ascend and Awaken. Meister Eckhart, a 14th-century mystic, whose teaching nearly got him condemned by the church and spent his life answering a question most people assume had an obvious answer. That question is, what does it actually mean to love God? His answer was not what most people expected, and it may change how you move through an ordinary day. Jesus had already given the foundation. When asked which commandment was greatest, Eckhart answered with two that he insisted could not be separated. He said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Like it. Not similar to it, not a lesser version of it, like it. Eckhart spent decades unpacking what that word means. And what he arrived at is one of the most radical and most practical insights in the entire mystical tradition. For most people, loving God and loving the neighbor feel like two separate activities, one vertical, one horizontal. You pray, you meditate, you go inward to reach the divine. Then separately, you go outward to help other people. Eckhart said no, they are not two activities, they are one. His reasoning was precise. The love by which we love God and the love by which we love the neighbor are not different loves operating in different directions. They are the same love, flowing from the same source, expressing itself through the same soul. He said, "The love by which we love God is the very same love with God as first love us. And if that love originates in God, if it flows from the divine into the soul and back outward into the world, then to genuinely love a neighbor is not a separate act from loving God. It is the same act, expressing itself differently." He said, "All morality, inward and outward, is comprehended in love, for love is the foundation of all the commandments. The interior life and the relational life are not parallel tracks. They are the same river, moving in two directions at once." Eckhart was careful here. He knew that what passes for love of neighbor is often something considerably less. He said, "If I had a friend and loved him because of the benefits which this brought me and because of getting my own way, then it would not be my friend that I loved, but myself." This is one of the most quietly devastating observations in his entire body of work. How much of what we call love of God, of neighbor, of family is actually love of ourselves by another name? Love for what the other gives us, love for the comfort or the approval or the sense of our own goodness that the loving produces. Real love of the neighbor, Eckhart insists, is love that has been through God first. It comes back out cleansed of the ego's need to benefit from the loving. This leads to one of Eckhart's most important and most misunderstood teachings, one that directly challenges a version of contemplative life that has always been tempting. He said, "Spirituality is not to be learned by flight from the world, or by running away from things, or by turning solitary and going apart from the world. Rather, we must learn an inner solitude wherever or with whomsoever we may be. We must learn to penetrate things and find God there. Find God there. Not find God in the monastery and bring him back to the marketplace. Find God there, in the marketplace, in the conversation, in the face of a difficult person, in the ordinary moment of ordinary contact with another human being." He said, "He knows God rightly who knows him everywhere." The neighbor is not an interruption of the spiritual life. The neighbor is the one of its primary locations. Eckhart was honest that this is not easy. He said, "It is a hard thing to practice this universal love and to love our neighbors as ourselves, as our Lord commanded us. He who has found this way of love seeketh no other." Universal love, not selective love, not love for the people who are easy to love, who agree with us, who give us something back. Universal. This is where the interior work and the relational life become indistinguishable. The deeper the interior practice, the more the false self has been quieted, the more the ego's need for particular outcomes has been loosened. The more naturally love flows outward without needing to be managed or earned or returned. He who has found this way of love seeketh no other. That is not a promise of ease. It is a description of what happens when the interior and exterior become one movement. Thomas Merton, the 20th century Trappist monk who spent years inside the monastery learning to go inward, had a moment on an ordinary street corner in Louisville, Kentucky in 1958 that showed him exactly what Eckhart had been pointing at. He was running errands for the monastery, surrounded by strangers in a shopping district, and something opened in him. He said, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people, and that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. And then, he said, there is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was as if suddenly I saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin, nor desire, nor self knowledge can reach, the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. All those strangers, walking around shining like the sun. This is what Eckhart's teaching looks like when it arrives not as a concept, but as a direct experience. Eckhart and Merton are not alone in pointing here. St. Francis of Assisi, the 13th century friar who gave away everything he had and called the sun his brother and the leper his teacher, understood that the love of God and the love of the most difficult neighbor were the same act. His whole life was the evidence. Henri Nouwen, the Dutch priest who spent his final years living alongside people with severe disabilities in a community in Canada, called this the wounded healer. The place of your own deepest vulnerability, he said, becomes the very place from which genuine love flows outward to others. Howard Thurman, the 20th century African American mystic and theologian whose book Jesus and the Disinherited was a primary source that Martin Luther King carried with him everywhere, argued that the entire teaching of Jesus was directed at those who stand with their backs against the wall. The interior life of love, Thurman insisted, was always meant to produce a different way of being in the world with others. Different centuries, different lives, the same pointing. Go inward far enough, and what you find there inevitably moves outward toward every person you encounter. This is not an abstract teaching. Eckhart was a preacher, not just a philosopher. He wanted people to take this home. It means that the difficult conversation at work is a spiritual practice. The person who irritates you is a teacher. The stranger in the grocery store is, in Merton's words, walking around shining like the sun, whether either of you knows it. It means that every act of genuine care for another person, no matter how small, no matter how unreturned, is not a detour from the spiritual life. It is one of the spiritual life's most direct expressions. Loving God and loving the neighbor are not two commandments that happen to appear on the same list. They are two descriptions of one movement of the soul that has found its ground. As I look back over my life, there were many times I genuinely believed I was loving people unconditionally, only to discover sometimes years later that it was conditional in ways I hadn't seen. Let me share a couple of examples. In my previous marriage, I believed I was fully supportive, that I was giving her whatever she needed. What I eventually understood, that I never allowed her the space to simply be upset, angry, or in pain. I was always trying to fix it. And as Eckhart would say, that fixing was more about me than it was about her. I needed things to be a certain way. What I called love was, in part, love of my own comfort in disguise. The second example is my spiritual path itself. For a long time, I believed that if I studied enough mystics, meditated consistently, did all the practices, that I would eventually see concrete evidence I was doing it right, that I was progressing. Looking back, that too was conditional. I was loving the path the way Eckhart warned us against loving God, for what it gave me, for the sense of my own advancement. What shifted over the past 10 years or so is that I stopped looking for growth and started simply following my heart each day, what brings me joy, love, and peace. I stay more present. And at the end of the day, I give total gratitude for everything that happened, knowing that each moment was exactly as it was supposed to be. That is a different kind of love, quieter, less needy, more free. And then about 5 years ago, something arose in my center, a feeling, a calling that I needed to put something positive and loving into the world, something that might help offset a little of the darkness. That is how Ascend and Awaken came to be. I want to be clear about something. This channel was never about money or subscriber counts or building a platform. It is simply an act of love, sharing what has genuinely helped me on my own path, made with the intention of putting it out in the world and letting it go. If it reaches one person beyond myself and opens something in them, it was completely worth every moment spent making it. I am deeply grateful for the growth that the channel has experienced, for the overwhelming warmth and generosity of this community. And on those rare occasions when a comment comes in that is less than loving, I don't engage. I bless that person silently and move on, knowing I have no idea what they have carried to arrive at that moment, and it is not mine to judge. That is what loving the neighbor without condition actually looks like for me right now. Not perfectly, not without continuing to learn, but genuinely. And I plan to keep doing it for as long as I can and I'm walking this earth. Today's invitation is this. Today, just once, look at someone in your ordinary day and try to do what Merton did on that street corner. Not an elaborate spiritual practice, just a moment of genuine seeing. The person at the checkout, the colleague you find difficult, the stranger on the road. Look at them and ask quietly, what would it mean if this person is, right now, walking around shining like the sun? You don't have to feel it, just ask the question. Eckhart would say that the asking itself is already the beginning of the love. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Ascend and Awaken. Where do you find it hardest to love the neighbor as yourself? Share in the comments. I read every one, and I truly love to know. If Ascend and Awaken supports your journey, consider subscribing for more reflections on timeless wisdom, spiritual awakening, and inner peace. Until next time, peace, love, and light to you on your spiritual journey.